All right, welcome back, everybody. Today's episode is on the very controversial topic of abortion. And this topic relates closely to my last episode in that I believe there is a morally correct answer here, but I am far from confident that anyone has come to it, or at least proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that their answer is the objectively correct answer. For more on my thoughts on the evolution of human understanding of moral truth, go back and see my last episode. And with that said, if you're listening in hopes to find something to support your own view that you already have, I think you'll be disappointed with this episode in that I'm likely to leave you with more questions than answers. And for that reason, you'll notice that there is a little bit of a difference between what I believe in my personal life and try to practice versus what I think is appropriate to impose on society. So first, I'll go through a few definitions to make sure we're all on the same page with what I'm talking about. Then I'll talk a little bit about my own background so that you can judge any potential biases and adjust for those. I'll talk through my thoughts on abortion as it relates to moral or immoral practice, and then I'll touch on a few surrounding topics very briefly just to not ignore them completely. So first, let's talk about types of birth control and set some definitions. There are contraceptives such as condoms, which prevent the sperm and egg from meeting through physical barrier. There is the birth control pill, which prevents the sperm from meeting the egg through preventing ovulation, essentially preventing the release of an egg. There is the morning after pill, which is essentially high dose birth control to prevent ovulation and again prevent sperm from meeting egg. Or in the case that sperm does meet the egg and the egg becomes fertilized, it may prevent implantation in the uterus of the fertilized egg. And finally, there is abortion, which is the termination of a zygote or fetus which has already implanted in the uterus. All right, now let's talk about my background and any potential biases I may have. I should start by saying on paper, I was the perfect candidate to be aborted. I was born to a poor single teen mother with only her sister to turn to for help and a place to live. My biological father, a term that I don't really like because he's not my father at all, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know or care to know much about. I've heard the term bad crowd thrown around a bit, but I've never bothered to dig into the details of what exactly that meant. From context, I suspect drugs or at least alcohol and run-ins with the law. I was later adopted by a great man who is my real father and the only father I've ever known, but at the time that he met my mother, he was just a poor kid with a rough background of his own. My mother put herself through college, and for years I went to cheap daycare, lived in subsidized housing, and got my clothes from church drives. I lived in some rough neighborhoods as my parents worked their way out. I had babysitters who told me they were joining gangs and tricked me into shoplifting. At the grocery store, they'd tell me, "Oh, I forgot something. Here, take this candy bar out front and I'll meet you after I go grab it. I already paid for this." Knowing full well that if a 6-year-old got caught stealing a candy bar, he'd just be told to put it back. The first and only crime I ever knowingly committed was a breaking and entering at the age of 6 when a group of older kids forced me to break into a neighbor's home to steal a stack of Playboys. The guilt that followed that act turned out to be a very formative moment for me in my resolve to never again allow my morals to crumble in the face of a challenge. In most ways, I was exactly who you're told is supposed to be aborted. Statistics say I should be a criminal. I made my mother's already difficult life even harder. And for a less resilient mother, I would probably be a reminder of someone she wishes she could forget. Despite all of that, I believe my views on abortion to be fairly nuanced, and I think I do a pretty good job of keeping emotion out of it. At the end of the day, I try to find an objective moral answer. The problem I run into is the answer lies in a truth I don't yet feel I have access to. Again, this is where this argument relates to the last podcast. I believe an objective answer exists, but I don't yet believe we have found it. At least no one has convinced me that they have. To me, the answer lies simply in where does human life begin? It seems pretty obvious to me that extinguishing innocent life is morally wrong. But trying to pin down the start of a human life proves to be very difficult, even among scientists. I once tried such a discussion, and it eventually ended in weird turns down a path of survival probabilities and the multiverse theory in physics. If there's a 1 in 1,000 chance of life, then in some universe that is life. So do we take the 1 in 1,000 chance we are killing that life, or just see where the dice land? For now, I personally am uncomfortable with the risk and prefer to date women with the same view, that they are not comfortable getting an abortion, so we will be careful but ultimately accept the consequences together if we get pregnant. However, I don't believe I have a strong case to push that on society. At current time, I am most comfortable with heartbeat laws, and I'll explain why as we dig into this subject, but am still not certain enough to say that my current beliefs should be absolute policy. As an exercise to challenge my beliefs, I once thought of this as a cake-making analogy, something I probably stole from the Seinfeld episode about abortion, where they argue about a pizza being a pizza from the time it is just dough or from the moment it comes out of the oven. I first asked myself, is cake mix in the box a cake? I would say no. I think it's fair to say this is not yet a cake, and we can prevent the mix, water, and eggs from meeting without destroying an existing cake. A metaphor for birth control, at least as it relates to condoms and the birth control pill. Once ingredients are mixed, though, things start to get murky. After mixing all ingredients, but prior to going in the oven, do you have a cake? I think most would say only once it goes in the oven does cake begin to form. But some could reasonably disagree that once all ingredients are mixed, you have a cake that's just not yet baked. The metaphor here is for the morning after pill in cases in which a sperm has fertilized the egg and the morning after pill prevents implantation in the uterus. When a sperm fertilizes an egg, in order for pregnancy to occur, the egg must successfully implant in the uterus. Let's dive into this part of the metaphor a little more before moving on with it. Depending on the source, the chance of implantation of a fertilized egg is about 25 to 67%, with most putting it around 30 to 50%, meaning that half or less than half of fertilized eggs result in a pregnancy. Still, other sources say that a fertilized egg has a 40 to 60% chance of being lost before birth. So it's fairly safe to say that a fertilized egg has approximately a 50-50 shot of becoming life. So what does this mean? Well, first we should state that when people take the morning after pill, they don't know whether the egg has been fertilized or not. But in the cases where an egg has been fertilized and the morning after pill is preventing implantation, can we assume there's about a 50-50 chance that the morning after pill is preventing a viable human life? If so, is this the same as ending life? Does it yet qualify? For me, it's honestly hard to say. But here I lean towards no, preventing potential life is not the same as extinguishing existing life. From the outset, we can say every sperm and egg has some probability of combining to form life. So is the morning after pill preventing implantation much different from other traditional forms of birth control? For me, the discomfort level certainly rises, but it's hard for me to draw a distinction between that and other forms of contraception. What about when the cake batter has already been placed in the oven? Still, many barriers stand in the way before you have a viable cake. Is the oven set correctly? Preheated to the correct temperature? Is the timer set? The metaphor here being an implanted zygote or embryo. Various sources seem to indicate that between 12 and 30% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. Now we have moved in the metaphor to an implanted zygote or embryo, and from about a 50-50 coin toss on whether fertilization will reach life to at least a 70% chance. And of course, the more time that goes by without complication, the more sure we are, with the chance of miscarriage being less than 1% at around 16 weeks. But even with all of this data to guide our understanding of how likely it is to have a baby, we have unintentionally sidestepped the core issue, which is, what is human life? Where is the distinct line between ingredients and human being? When is miscarriage or abortion a loss of life versus a mere failure to achieve life? Let us try another method of examination by walking through the stages of pregnancy. First, a quick note. Pregnancy is most often measured in weeks, and those weeks are measured from the last menses. Ovulation and thus fertilization typically occur about 2 weeks after this. So when looking at things from a fertilization of the egg point of view, when we say 3 weeks pregnant, you're approximately 1 week post fertilization of the egg. Approximately 1 day after an egg is fertilized by a sperm, the cells begin to divide. At 3 weeks pregnant, or approximately 1 week post-fertilization, the cluster of eggs, called a zygote, implants in the uterine lining. At 4 weeks after the last menses, and approximately 2 weeks post-fertilization, cells begin to form organ systems, and the zygote is still smaller than a grain of rice. From here, I'll just use the standard weeks pregnant, and you can subtract the 2 weeks for fertilization yourself. At 5 weeks, the central nervous system starts to form. At 7 weeks, there's a heartbeat. At 9 weeks, the mouth, eyes, and tongue are forming. By 10 weeks, organs are formed, there's brain activity, and brain waves can be measured. At 11 weeks, the embryo is now considered a fetus. At 12 weeks, you can now test for Edward and Down syndrome. At 13 weeks, the fetus can swim about. At 20 weeks, ears are functioning and the fetus can likely hear. At 24 weeks, it begins making breathing-like movements. At 36 weeks, rapid lung development begins. And between 39 and 41 weeks is considered a full-term pregnancy where the baby is expected to be born. A baby born between 37 and 39 weeks is considered early term, and premature is anything before 37 weeks. However, at 34 weeks, the baby is almost fully developed and has almost the same long-term outcomes as full-term. Premature babies born at 33 weeks have a 70% chance of an ICU stay for complications, but still a 99.5% survival rate. So for me, it seems objectively clear that at 34 weeks or later, abortion is taking a life, and there's a strong argument to be made for 33 weeks or later. But here again, we are at risk of playing the statistics game, which forgets individual cases. So let's look at the earliest surviving birth. By this point in history, multiple births occurring before 28 weeks have made it to adulthood. The record now for a surviving premature baby is 21 weeks and 1 day of pregnancy. So where we previously had a strong argument for setting the line somewhere around the 33 or 34 week mark, I would say now it's fair to set the line of definite human life here around the 21 week mark. But as medical care continues to advance, this clock will certainly roll back further. So do we set the line here and move it with advances in healthcare, or try to discover the true line on our own through some other means? One could argue that at 16 weeks, all major systems have formed, and chances of survival, given the opportunity to remain in the womb, are greater than 99%, constituting a fully viable life. And personally, I'm inclined to agree here, though you, of course, have the right to come to your own conclusion. One could also argue to set the line at brainwaves, 10 weeks of pregnancy. It is easy to see the reasons for that. Others will say life starts with the heartbeat at 6 or 7 weeks. Others still as early as implantation, when the zygote is more likely than not to reach full term. Some will even set the line at fertilization, thus excluding things like the morning after pill. And understanding this, we can also understand how some, though very few now, would take the next step to say, we have no right to prevent the sperm that would meet the egg to form life, and therefore even contraceptives like condoms are out. As you try to find the definite line of life, the whole thing gets very hazy. This is why for my personal life, I set the line fairly early. I am most comfortable with a partner who believes in birth control up to the point of implantation, and after that, allowing nature to take its course. Now, we could talk all day here about the other statistics involved, crime rates and the like, but to me, these are irrelevant. Simply because poverty-stricken neighborhoods have more crime doesn't mean we go around executing the poor. Somewhere there has to be a line which defines life. An innocent life should be protected, whatever the statistics. My problem is I can't find that line, and so far, no one else has convinced me they have either. So it's very hard for me to feel I can dictate it to others. Before closing out, I should also note that I haven't addressed outlier cases such as rape. This is because I believe this issue to be a full subject unto itself. Suffice it to say, I believe such special cases should be examined and considered when working through the abortion issue, but in a similar manner, it will be difficult without first defining life, then weighing the morality of all options and possible outcomes. I should also address the Supreme Court ruling which reignited a lot of this controversy. Anytime I have a question on constitutionality, I don't watch the news or even go to the courts so much. I read the Constitution. It's a conveniently short read. In this case, I agree with the matter being returned to the states, as it is not a constitutional issue. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution enumerates the powers of the legislative branch, starting off, the Congress shall have the power to, then goes on to talk about powers of the Congress as they relate to taxation, money, regulation of the military, but nothing that can even be construed as remotely relevant to the issue of abortion, or even healthcare in any way. Article 3, Section 2 states that the judicial power can be appellate of state law, but no federal law applies or can apply to override the state except in constitutional matters. And finally, the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Whether we think this should be constitutional is a separate issue not addressed here, but that would require amending the Constitution in order to wrest the issue from the states, something that would need to occur in the legislative body prior to returning the issue to the Supreme Court. So that was an awful lot of talking to say, I don't know what the answer is here, and I don't pretend to. But as far as I can tell, no one else has super solid answers either. For me, I'm not comfortable inviting abortion into my personal life. For legislation in my state, until we do better at defining life, I feel best setting the limit somewhere between 7 weeks with a heartbeat and 16 weeks with greater than 99% chance of survival, also giving some time for exception cases. As always, I'm just thinking out loud. I have more questions than answers, and of course, I may be wrong, but that ability to test ideas, learn, and grow is what makes this country great. So be honest, allow yourself to be wrong sometimes, and be fearless in the exercise of your rights. Thank you for listening.